Keep the Faith is pleased to present the following program.
You might call this meeting with my three guests a morality play, and you could call it the story of Peter and Paul, with St. Michael thrown in for the bargain. Our guest of honor is Reverend Father Paul Wickens, and Father Paul Wickens had a little to do with Archbishop Peter Garrity of Newark, so you get the Peter-Paul connection. St. Michael, the Archangel, is Michael Davies here, who is a great defender of traditional Roman Catholicism, the author of many books and 3 crucial ones on liturgical revolution. And Paul Fisher, I don't know if he's canonized yet, a veteran journalist of Triumph Magazine, The Wanderer, and the National Catholic Register, not reporter. Now, Father Wickens, I had the privilege of showing up at your 35th anniversary of your ordination. It was very fittingly held in an armory. There were huge tanks with guns. So you are under the gun, and you did not celebrate your 35th anniversary in any church of the Archdiocese of Newark. So just tell us about your embattled position. And right now you have a chapel called St. Anthony of Padua Chapel. How come you are in the chapel and in the armory with guns and not in some church of the Archdiocese of Newark?
Well, Archbishop Garrity, who is a modernist, which is the current heresy, you might call it liberalism or modernism sweeping through the church, I became more and more aware, as I functioned in the diocese after his arrival in 1974, that he was an outright modernist. When a bishop comes in, you usually give him the benefit of the doubt, or you feel he's ill-advised, or he has maybe surrounded by some middle management people who are modernists. But I realized little by little that he was a modernist, and then we started to do what we could.
What do you mean by modernist? Just sum up quickly.
Well, one who thinks you can modernize dogma and morals. I mean, that's a simple definition. One who thinks you can update dogma and morals. What they do is they, as most people who have read Michael Davies and read a lot of the other good writers about the struggle here, in the church today, that they were very clever, and what they did was they changed the modernists succeeded in rising into positions on liturgical conferences and changing the expression of the dogma and morals. Because if they changed the dogma and the morals, it would have alarmed the average person. They would have run away. So they changed the expression of it, and they worked on the liturgy, and the liturgy little by little watered down the idea of hell, the idea of devotion to our Blessed Mother, the idea of the need for confession, and also what the liturgy did was it preached also a moral relativism, and that's been really devastating. So I could see this in Archbishop Garrity, and at first he welcomed in, within the first few months, Charlie Curran into the diocese. That was one of the first things he did. And then he opened the cathedral up for a Protestant ordination and a few other things like that. So I began to write him letters at the usual letter route. Everyone has to go through that route, you know. And because you think that you can simply write a letter and they'll respond to it, there's goodwill. But what we don't realize is that philosophically, they're different than we are. They think differently. They really don't think about, I've heard Michael Davies say this too, the modernist really doesn't believe in God. And the modernist certainly doesn't fear God. And since the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, once you lose fear of the Lord, you've lost wisdom. You've lost the faith. And they do not fear the Lord at all. And so then a group of people, and I was connected with it, got up a newsletter to try to combat some of the modernist propaganda in the diocese.
Give us the name of that, or are you willing to...
New Jersey Catholic News.
The New Jersey Catholic
And it was small at first, and then it grew, and then after it grew for a couple of years, Archbishop Garrity called me down to speak to me, and he said, this has got to stop. And then, of course, another few months, a few years went by, and it grew more and more. It had more of an impact. See, it seems to me that you really don't... I was eventually suspended by Archbishop Garrity, and Brother John down in Berlin, where there's a traditional chapel, he said it seems to him that if you're a conservative, a traditionalist, and there are many priests who are better than I am, not that I'm trying to humble myself artificially, but they were not suspended, and they might even be more traditional, but the people who are suspended are those who confront modernism head-on and have an influence, have an impact. So if I was still in the parish, there was no newsletter, and I had my novenas, and I had a little rosary society, I wouldn't be suspended. But if you confront it and get some kind of a following or an impact, that's why Archbishop Lefebvre is suspended, it was suspended, now excommunicated, and a number of priests, Father King up in Boston, Father Jardina in Alabama, these are all wonderful priests, and many of you know them.
Well, Excuse me, Father, what type of thing was in the newsletter? Did you say the Archbishop didn't believe in God or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, you know, they claim to be very democratic, as you know, the liberals, but they are very undemocratic when you use the same tactics they do. They take over the media, as you know. Everyone knows that. So this was a medium, I guess, and they didn't like that. He was trying to stop it. They do not like any opposition that has an impact.
You know, I believe you pointed out that he hadn't really got the best financial deal for the diocese when he sold his seminary, didn't you, which didn't go down
That was another thing, too, yeah. We did mention what we thought was some very shady financial situations. He sold I forget how many acres.
Something like 450, I think.
Yeah, it was tremendous.
In plush country, where it's worth a fortune per acre.
And he got like 8.5 million. Actually, it's supposedly worth over $100 million.
Yeah, that would be the going rate.
Yeah.
Well, who did he sell it to? What was the name of that game?
He sold it to some developers.
They'll
Now,
put up a supermarket and subdivisions and so on, and this will prove the progress of the church.
I think he was in just such a hurry to sell it. It was just such a hurry, wanted to get the money. See, the liberals also build up these immense bureaucracies. Everybody gets paid. Used to be a lot of volunteers, but nobody's volunteer anymore. There's DREs and liturgical this and youth minister this, and they all get paid, not only on the parish level, but on the diocesan level, and becomes a huge monster devouring funds. And with a diminishing number of people attending Mass, that's been pointed out in everyone's books, including Michael Davies, who's here, and the income diminished, and yet the amount of money to be spent. So they're just looking for money, and this came along, and he sold it. He probably, if he was a shrewd businessman, would have hung on to it for a few years and bickered, and probably got 3 or 4 times the amount.
Was that the letter that got his attention about the sale, or what really got his attention?
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
what year are we?
It was a cumulative, really.
Yeah. Was Garrity involved in the call to action, that infamous thing in Detroit?
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh,
Did he start it, or was Dearden?
That was in '76, I believe, and he and Dearden were Cardinal Dearden. Is he a cardinal?
He was.
They were very much involved in that. But it seems to me, see, you can escape the wrath of the bishop. See, usually they ignore you if they can. And then if they can't ignore you, they try to bounce you around a little bit. I have a very good friend in the Midwest Diocese, very good friend, a priest, who now was assigned to working in, he's traditional, he's the only one in the diocese virtually, so he's assigned to a bureaucratic job raising funds. He has no parish, no pulpit, no school, no confessional, you see. So in order for him to break away from that, he's got to be, quote, unquote, disobedient. So it's very hard to beat these bureaucrats, you know. So that's how he keeps this priest from making any kind of an influence or impact in the diocese. He just removes him from a position where he can exercise his sacerdotal ministry the way he was trained to.
And of course, if he raises funds, he's raising funds for the Antichrist, for the very reversal of the church.
Right.
What's your status now, Father?
Well, it's hard to say because, I mean, as I said to Bill before, if, you know, he had a very happy marriage, a wonderful wife, and during the course of that, if he got the bishop angry and he handed him a piece of paper and said, look, you're suspended from your marriage, well, what would you do? You know, you would ignore it, and that's really basically what we did. He handed me a piece of paper and said, you're suspended from the priesthood, and which means what? I asked him to put it in writing. Does it mean you can say Mass? Does it mean I can baptized doesn't mean I get married. He said, look it up. That's all he said to me.
Nothing in writing.
Look it up.
A bishop, he's supposed to be like a father to all the priests in his diocese.
Yeah.
Did he always treat you in a courteous and fatherly manner?
No.
Oh.
But the reverse was not true. But the reverse is not true. I always treat, I still do, really. I feel sorry for the man. I look upon him almost like a father who went bad. I mean, all of us had fathers, dear fathers, but suppose Dad did go bad. He started to drink or abuse Mom or something. Well, you'd still love the man. You'd still have charity for. You couldn't follow him, though. And you couldn't let his weakness ruin your life also, or the work that you're going to do. So that's the way I feel about Bishop Garrity. Right now, he's forced out. When I went over to Rome a few years ago, and I spoke to Cardinal Ratzinger's office of Monsignor Clemens, I think he's one of his right-hand men, he seemed to be, and I had a German sister with me who I happen to have a cousin a German cousin who was a sister who was in Rome, and we went to see Monsignor Clemens, and he said, Bishop Garrity, we have a big high stack of complaints about him. And sure enough, that was November, and I think in January he was asked to step down, to resign.
But he was the age, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. No, he was a year and a half short of the age, and he was in very good condition. As a matter of fact, now he's been out 4 years now, and he's still around, and he's in very good shape. Really, he looks considerably younger than he is.
Well, you have a new ordinary now, so
yeah, we have a new
status with him?
Well, that's why he asked me before, Dr. Maher, what's my status now? And it's very vague. It's typical post-conciliar situation. You don't really, the words are vague. For example, they call confession healing. You know, isn't that a vague term? What does it mean, you know? Well, that's the same with these suspensios. They're very vague about them. And I went to the canon lawyer in the diocese, of course. That's the canon lawyer in the diocese belongs to the Archbishop, and so I went over to Rome. I told him in Rome who I was, what diocese I was from, and he invited me to say Mass with the Pope. Literally, Monsignor Dziwisz.
Jewish.
No, not Jewish. It starts with a D. D.
Oh, I see.
Does anyone know how to pronounce that? The Archbishop, I mean, our Holy Father's secretary, real gentlemanly priest.
And you told him you're from the Archdiocese of
I told him
Nova.
where I was from, and he says, you come and you bring your stole and say Mass with the Pope. And I did. So someone said, well, did you give him any details? And I said, no, I didn't. They didn't ask, and I didn't offer them. And I said Mass with the Pope. So automatically, I think, in an ancient law of the Church, my suspensio is removed. I think
You sound like a Jesuit.
Yeah, Jesuit. Well, so I don't really know. And under the new Archbishop, I've had dialogues with him, very brief dialogues, but I can't get down to brass tacks, as we say here in America. I couldn't get down to any facts or canon law. He just used his authority. And I heard earlier today someone mentioned that the liturgical people just throw authority around. Well, it's really what they do. You could never get a bishop to discuss the merits of sex ed or general absolution or the decline of mass attendance, or you could never get him to I could never get him to discuss it at all. I couldn't get him even to, this is a Bible, it's not the divine office, but I brought the divine office in one day to Archbishop Garrity, and I said, now, I've heard from a lot of the priests in the diocese that we are no longer obliged to recite the divine office daily. See, we took an oath when we were subdeacons to say the divine office every day sub gravi, under pain of mortal sin. I said, are we still obliged to say the divine office? So he said to me, look it up. So I said, well, I'm here. I was always respectful to him. I always call him Archbishop Garrity. And to this day, as a matter of fact, he even said to me, he says, you're a conservative. He says, conservatives obey their bishop. And
Well, you got something right.
so anyway, but let me interject something that I wanted to bring out in this point. I have the Holy Scriptures with me because I run into this all the time. I run into good people connected with the remnant, and good people with the wanderer, and good people from Cuff, good Catholic people who do not come to our chapels. When I say our chapels, the chapels of Archbishop Lefebvre. I'm not with Archbishop Lefebvre, although I love him. I think he's a saint of our age. And but there's many priests who are independent, have chapels. But usually people from Cuff and from the Wanderer usually will not come, and they'll say, "You're a nice guy, Father, but I have to," you know, in effect they say you're disobedient. In effect they say that. And you can give them all the tracts you want on false obedience and true obedience, or Cardinal Newman, I think, wrote considerably about obedience, false obedience and true obedience. But I think the best way is to just read the words of our Lord. Chapter 12, St. Matthew, Jesus went through the corn on the Sabbath, and his disciples, being hungry, began to pluck the ears. And the Pharisees, seeing them, said to him, "Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day." And Jesus said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and how they were with him, how he entered into the house of God and did eat the loaves of proposition, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for them that were with him, but for the priests only? Or have ye not read in the law that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and are without blame?" I mean, what we break is Archbishop Lefebvre and Father Launay and Father Keene and Father LeBlanc and all wonderful priests. I've met so many throughout the country, and Father Schell, and what they do is they do what Christ did. They take an administrative law and they say, this administrative law is contrasts the salvation of souls. This administrative law, meaning the bishop's law, is holding back the salvation of souls.
Isn't that, Father, what you call the bottom line over here, that the fundamental principle in the church is that the salvation of souls is the supreme law?
Oh, yes.
And the canon law of the church is meant to assist in that purpose.
Right.
But in your case, shall we say, Garrity was endorsing the corruption of Catholic children in this archdiocese with sex education. You were one of the few priests actively opposing it.
Yeah.
And you, in order to remain in a legally correct situation with Garrity, you would have had to give up your opposition to sex education. That was really what it was all about, wasn't it?
Right. I could talk in the kitchen, or I could talk here with a group of people saying I'm opposed to sex ed, and Bishop Garrity would not bother me or anyone. But if you go public, and Paul Fisher asked us before, what was the sort of the turning point, and I think I would say that was it, when we opposed the sex ed in the public schools, which the bishop endorsed, sex ed in the public schools, and then his next step was to begin it in the parochial schools. And as Dr. Maher, who's been indefatigable since, you must have started 100 years ago, condemning sex ed.
He was the first, weren't he, with the Holy
He saw the handwriting on the wall, and someone wrote a book, an article, she's often spoken here at the forum, called The Final Plague.
Randy Engel.
The Final Plague, sex education. You can't go any worse than that.
The cutting edge of all permissiveness, all abortion, all contraception, all fornication.
Just corrupt, you know, destroy the latency period, and little children. And so anyway, yeah, we did oppose that. I belonged to the coalition, we called it, of the coalition of 3 states, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. It doesn't make any difference. Mary Kay Smith was moderator of that group. And so we called a press conference, and we strenuously opposed the sex ed in the parochial schools and advised people to boycott the collections until it was removed.
That was your sin.
That was it. No, that was, and you know, it's a funny thing, because I had asked Bishop Garrity several times, because we did meet many, many times. And when I started meeting with him the first time, there were several boycotts going on in this country. One was the Farris flax boycott, and the other one was the grape boycott, the lettuce and grape boycott. And he supported both of those boycotts, by the way. And I asked him, one of the questions I asked him, what are the moral rules governing boycotts? Because
the theology of boycott.
Yeah, we studied that, really. I mean, it's like going on strikes. There is a morality of strikes and boycotts, because people do get hurt, even innocent people. So it has to be a last resort. And but he, again, you could not get in a discussion with Bishop Garrity. I pray for the man, really, and I look upon him as my father. Now, the new man that came in, Bishop McCarrick, came in, I don't know how they ever said that he was conservative, because...
he might have been. Father Brian Horton, if you read his book, Mitre and Crook.
Yeah, oh, he did.
He said the first thing they do when someone becomes a bishop is to remove his backbone. So he might have been
Yeah.
a conservative
It's
before he had
tough.
his operation.
It's tough being a bishop. I mean, I always felt the greatest sympathy for a bishop because you have to deal with, what, 800 or 900 priests and everyone different.
And nuns.
Oh, I forgot about that, and sisters and nuns, and financial problems and so forth. And so it's very difficult, and it's a hard line to walk because even though you want to maintain the Catholic faith, you get put on into programs and you're sitting next to Mario Cuomo, you know, or Jim Florio, the governors of these two states, New Jersey and New York. And they're pro-abortionists, and you get put on a platform, let's say at the Al Smith dinner, or at the dedication of some civil edifice in the town, because a cardinal or a bishop becomes a civic figure as well. So it's very hard, you know, it's a very hard line to, so I always kind of felt sorry for them, and I still do, but yet this sympathy and sorrow, it can't stop us from doing what we want to do. One other thing I wanted to, you know, I was talking about people like cuff people, and I do love the cuff people, and I support them, and I just hope they would support us. I hope we would all support one another, publicly anyway. Privately, we can argue all we want. But I remember when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, and he did a good job out there, and he decided he was going to make a run at the presidency, and he got together all his people around him. He says, look, I'm going to make a run at the presidency. Now, we're all conservatives, we're all Republicans and so forth, but we must never, and we have little differences of opinions, but publicly we must never express them, because we're weak in it, especially the middle ground people. And I think that's true with us here. I mean, the liberals, they're in a category all of their own. Then you have the solid state traditionalists. But you have a lot of middle ground people who are looking and looking. What is this priest going to say? What is this tape going to say? And if they find that we in any way knocked each other, even unintentionally, it's almost like a mother and father have a lot of decisions to make about raising their children. And if they disagree in front of the children, that's trouble, because then they go with the easiest way. So they should have all their arguments behind a closed door, and then come out as one unified authority. And so if there's one thing I would like to say about that, you know, I think that we can disagree all we want, and we should. After all, we're not made out of wood, we're not out of one kind of mold. We have a lot of different viewpoints on what technique, how do we restore Catholicism? What's our tactic? We all have the same intention. We want to restore the faith, save our own soul and the souls of those who are out there in the world, who Christ wants, who redeemed by his own blood. But over technique, right, some of us disagree. Some would say write letters, write petitions, fine. Some would say support Ecclesia Dei, fine. Some would say have traditional chapels like we do, fine. And so we should not knock Ecclesia Dei or knock any petition gathering. But on the other hand, we should not knock traditional chapels, even like subtly, because people are listening. They're listening out there, you know. Anyway, what happens is our Lord really laid it on the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees, and they were legitimate religious leaders. He said, you blind guides, you strain a gnat and swallow a camel. In other words, it's like someone making a big thing over an administrative law. You disobeyed the bishop, and yet they're swallowing all this denial of doctrine and all this moral corruption of their children. You know?
I think you've really got to the important point there, and if I possibly couldn't, I'd be very interested to hear what Mr. Fisher has to say about this. I understand he's been around for quite a time, watching developments in the United States.
Not 100 years like this.
If I could mix a couple of American metaphors, I would, as it were, like to up the ante and get down to the nitty-gritty, if you can go up and down at the same time. My impression now in the United States and in a lot of other countries is that when we come to the day of judgment, there are going to be two lines of priests, one going off with the goats, one going off with the sheep. And then the ones going off the sheep is going to be the ones who are suspended. And the ones with the goats are going to be the ones who weren't suspended, because I don't think Father Wickens' situation was at all unusual. Virtually now, I'd say in almost every parish of every diocese in this country, if a priest is going to remain in an acceptable situation with the bishop, he's got to condone sex education programs that corrupt the morals of the children. He's got to condone being taught in his parish schools catechetical programs that either don't teach the faith at all or contradict it. I understand in quite a few American dioceses, for example, the Baltimore Catechism is forbidden.
Oh, sure.
And he's got to tolerate ridiculous political statements by
He's got
by
to
the
tolerate
hierarchy.
Renew.
Yes.
He's got to tolerate RCIA, Marriage Encounter, Pre-Cana, and all these things are laced with this moral relativism.
And it was really summed up perfectly in that very famous article, which you'll remember, in the Homiletic and Pastoral Review, that applied to the Papist priests.
Right, right.
And it was a very perceptive article in which the author, a parish priest of long standing, said that in the United States now, a good number of dioceses are in Loctite control of the modernists, either with bishops who are modernists themselves, or bishops who allow their dioceses to be run by modernists. And there's no alternative now for a priest who is loyal to the magisterium. And this was the part I did not like. He said, but to retire and live out the rest of his priestly ministry in an active way. I think you have chosen the correct Catholic alternative, which is, in order to uphold the supreme law of the Church, which is the salvation of souls, if necessary, one must work outside the jurisdiction of the bishop if the bishop is visibly destroying the faith in his diocese. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Fisher, do you think that is an exaggeration of the state of the Church in the United States?
No, I think that's exactly true, but I think one of the problems you may face with the run-of-the-mine priest is you got to be physically and mentally prepared to take up like you. Some are
I know
wimpy.
what you mean.
They're just not going to do that. They stick with the bishop, even though they may agree with you, but not publicly.
I remember a Maryknoll priest, this was years ago, before all the trouble in the church, when the Maryknoll was good.
We're Catholic.
And they had a wonderful founder, Maryknoll, Bishop, was it Walsh?
Well, I don't know if he was the founder, but he was a great hero in the China prison.
And I remember in my home parish, I guess a seminarian or something, and a priest came home for his 2 months vacation from China. And he said, you know, people pat me on the back, he said, and what a wonderful missionary I am. He says, but I'm fortunate, he says, I have a good stomach. He said, some saintly priests go over there, and they just cannot tolerate the food, and they lay in bed all day. They're sick, you know. So you're right. Actually, it has to do with some kind of physical, it's not all spiritual or holy or anything. It has to do with your nervous system and your digestive system,
No,
really.
I think you're being too kind to your brother priests. You see, looking back at the Reformation in England, before going to the Reformation in England, I like to go back to that famous article in the Homiletic. I'm trying to think of the phrase, the priest who wrote it, and it's a reflection on the state of the Church in the United States. He didn't dare put his name. If he was a gay priest,
he would have put his name,
put his name.
He
was frightened to put his name. But didn't he say the vast majority of American priests, I think he called them flip-floppers or something like that. They flip when the bishop says flip and flop when the bishop says flop. And they really don't seem to have any principles at all.
Well, it's like the bishops themselves. You see them in conference, you know, in Washington when they're there in November. And it's throughout society, really. You'll get a third who are very liberal, you get a third who are conservative, and the mass third in the middle, they test the wind. Say which way the winner's going to go, the guys who can make me bishop or whatever are going to give me the funding I'm looking for. And that's what you have. They don't want to speak out and be too Catholic about this thing.
His father's got a Bible here. Isn't there something in the Bible about that? That's something about blowing neither hot nor cold.
Yes.
Vomiting comes into it, doesn't it?
Exactly.
You remember that one, Father?
Yeah, I do. I remember you, Michael, saying a very telling remark, and one of your many telling remarks, that the average person doesn't want trouble.
No.
I remember you saying that one, and that's true. I mean, only a nut wants trouble, you know?
Are you
Or a
not?
saint.
No, the average person does not want trouble. The fireman does not want to go into a burning house. He doesn't want to, you know, but he has to, you know. And that mother doesn't want to change that diaper, but she has to. It's her duty, you see. So you're not looking for trouble. What you're doing is you're trying to help somebody. And the phrase I think you were looking for before, when the priest who wrote the Plight of the Papist Priest, he said the best thing to do is go off and retire. But incidentally, I think Archbishop Lefebvre originally was going to do that.
Exactly.
You know, and then his people came to him. But the phrase is, and we all learn these all in the good Orthodox seminary, sacramentum propter homines. The sacraments are for people. They're not for ourselves. And you might say the priesthood is propter homines. It's for the people. I mean, the Catholic people absolutely need the priests. there's no other way you can get Holy Communion or absolution or extreme unction without the priest. You
The
cannot get
raison
it.
d'etre to the priesthood is to save souls.
Right.
And I was going to mention to you earlier about, I thought you were being too charitable to your brother priests. You see, in the Reformation in England, as you remember, under Henry VIII, he couldn't get his marriage annulled, so he made himself head of the church.
Right.
Well, the majority of the clergy went along with that. They compromised on that. Then when Henry VIII died and Thomas Cranmer started changing the liturgy, they went along with that change by change. And until in the end, they were ready to accept everything. By Edward VI died, you had Mary Tudor. She made everything Catholic again. They became Catholic again. Mary Tudor died, Elizabeth came in, they all became Protestants again and accepted the Protestant communion service. And so I think one has to say that, I mean, basically it's cowardice, it's a lack of integrity. I mean, look at St. John Fisher was the one bishop who stood up to Henry VIII. He was executed, of course, more or less as you perhaps, you've been morally executed. And St. Thomas More, the one layman. And I think one can be too kind to these priests. In canon law, doesn't a priest, probably not in the new code of canon law, didn't a priest have a solemn obligation of checking on the orthodoxy of the teaching in his parish school?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
definitely.
But what about all these monsignors who are perfectly orthodox themselves, who, since the Second Vatican Council, have never set foot in their schools because they don't want a confrontation with the nuns?
Yeah.
You see, as you say, people don't want trouble,
Well, it's always
but
that-
can't you have a duty to have trouble? Suppose the
Oh, yeah.
policeman's going along and seeing a robbery.
I think
Right,
in the early-
right, exactly.
In the early church, there was a part of the ritual where you said something to the effect of greet your brother or see your brother. It didn't mean shake hands. It meant to see whether the people around you are orthodox and following the church, or whether the church has been penetrated, and if so, report it to the authorities so you don't have this type of person in the church.
Father Paul Wickens, I want to ask you a couple of questions. If when they refer to Archbishop Lefebvre, they always love to say the rebel Archbishop, so you are the rebel priest. Now, as a rebel priest, would you still accept the authority of John Paul II as Pope?
Oh, definitely, definitely. First of all, the number one thing we accept is the Petron Office. I think we should make that clear, you know. I mean, Christ established the office of Peter to carry on the faith. Now, what is the main role of our Holy Father? Whoever sits in the Petron Office is to carry on nothing new. He's not supposed to innovate at all. The Pope is simply to carry on what was revealed through Christ and the apostles up to the present day. So we definitely, you know, believe this Pope to be the true Pope. Sure, he has weaknesses. When I was a little kid in grammar school, we always prayed for Pope Pius XII. Why did we pray for him? Because he was a human being, and of course we do more so today because of the pressures that the present pontiff is. Now, administratively, I've heard you say this yourself, Dr. Maher. I've often quoted you, but I remember one time you said that suppose the Pope ordered St. Peter's to be raised and a parking lot to be built. Would we as Catholic people be allowed to say that was unwise? And it's a rhetorical question because it goes without saying. If the Pope said, knock down St. Peter's, we could say, without being disloyal, hey, that was not a good idea, you know. So we could say to our Holy Father, we love you, you're the Holy Father, but I don't think that was a good idea to bring in the new Mass, you know. And also, even to go back a step, is to convoke the council. You know, you could even say that. Well, that's a whole different area.
Now, one other question that would be put to you. You're a priest 35 years, so much of your time you said the traditional immemorial Latin Mass. Have you ever said the Novus Ordo?
Oh, sure. I was saying it during the time of, it came in New Jersey, I think the rest of the English-speaking world officially in, I think, Advent 1971. That was when it was translated. The final translation came in, and I said it from there until all the way up to the time where Archbishop Garrity actually evicted me from the parish. And when he did, and I thought to myself, why don't I go back to the Mass? So it was really a blessing in disguise. I mean, I would have to say the expression, is it an Irish expression that when God closes the door, he opens the window? Is that Irish? Or whoever. But it's a nice expression, and that's really the case there. I would say that many windows were opened up, and I can only say that that it was really God's holy will. It was for the best. I don't know how, I don't know what would have happened if Archbishop Garrity did not kind of use his muscle. I might be just sort of languishing and maybe trying to keep the faith in the Novus Ordo Church with our parishioners, but everything we do is negated, neutralized by the next parish, or even the priest in the same parish. So it's almost a hopeless situation to stay in the parish.
But
know?
you think, would you say that the Novus Ordo is as such valid?
Yeah, yeah, it is valid.
And would you ever say it again, or you would?
Well, if I had to, I mean, I would, I know some traditional priests would absolutely never go near the Novus Ordo, and they have some good arguments, but I think it's valid. And when I was in Rome, as I mentioned, 4 years ago, and I was invited to say Mass with the Pope, I celebrated the Novus Ordo with the Pope.
In what language, by the way?
In Latin, yeah, Latin. Yeah.
Your Polish isn't that good, is it?
No, he did say it in Latin. The Pope said it in Latin. He had a lector, though, a woman lector, who was a nun, and he gave communion on the tongue.
Oh.
He was facing the crucifix. It was in his private chapel, private little chapel. One of the priests had told me when you go over there, he gave me the phone number, and see if you can attend the Pope's Mass. And you'll get to meet him, and you'll get in a semi-private kind of a situation. And that's when this Monsignor asked me to say Mass. He says, bring your stole and come to so-and-so and so-and-so, and to a certain door at a certain time. And I did, you know.
Now, you're in suspension. Can you appeal the suspension from Garrity?
Well, you've heard of the Congregation of the Clergy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I've been there. I've been to the Congregation of Clergy. I had many letters back and forth, and I finally did go over, and I met Cardinal Stanislaw, a very nice man, a very avuncular man. Mm-hmm. Someone mentioned in one of the previous talks how polite and receptive everybody is in Rome, and I found that to be true. I also found that to be true in the Senate in New Jersey. When we go there and we'd go visit Senator Bill Bradley and Senator Larry, we're very cordial, but nothing changed. Now, but that doesn't mean that it won't change, you know, that it's not capable of being changed. But I have to say there's an old world culture, an old world protocol in Rome. Everybody's very polite, and they make you feel very welcome.
It hadn't rubbed off on Garrity, though.
Oh, well, he was kind of a rough guy. He was kind of a rough guy. Actually, our objection was not so much to him. We have a little joke about it, you know, but it was his philosophy. Often, after I was suspended and the television people called us and they made a big fuss out of it because he released it to the press. And they tried to get...
The Archbishop released it to the press?
Yeah, he did. I was a complete neophyte. I didn't know anything about press, media, television. When I got onto the Live at 5, you know, and Channel 4, and of course the moderator there, his name was Jack Cafferty? Jack Cafferty. He tried to say, well, now you and the bishop are fighting, you know. And I said, no. I said, look, he's Mondale and I'm Reagan. We don't hate each other. He has a... Mondale, it was during the Mondale campaign. Mondale is a liberal. Reagan's a conservative. So they probably love each other, but they can't agree with one another. And that's the same here. It's a parallel. Bishop Garrity, it doesn't matter if he's cantankerous or he's polite. It doesn't make any difference in the long run. What matters really is the philosophy here. And his philosophy was very left-wing, very modernist, and very damaging to souls. And that's why I opposed not so much him, but what he stood for.
But
and
Mondale wasn't the bishop.
No, he wasn't.
Reagan.
No, he wasn't. No, that's not it. Every analogy limps, and that one really sagged. That sagged badly.
Let's get back to Charles Curran. This is one of the most notorious, shameful deeds in the history of the Catholic Church in America. There's a man who at least is honestly heretical. He never hides behind German sayings. The man openly says Rome is wrong on all its moral teaching, above all with respect to sex, abortion, contraception, divorce and remarry, and so on. Now, was it not the case in the Archdiocese of Newark, you have several hundred priests, 800 or so?
800 or 900, something like that,
Wasn't that the case that Garrity mandated the attendance of the clergy at Curran's lecture?
Yeah, on every level, too. He had the priests one day and the sisters another day, and then he had one for the lady. But you open up a point there, maybe inadvertently. why aren't they Suspensio? Why isn't a Charles Curran suspended? I remember Michael saying in one of his...
Why isn't he shot?
So everybody knows what Michael thinks and what Dr.
Yeah.
and Maher thinks because they've written and spoke so much publicly. And I remember Michael saying that if a person like Wickland is, the Cardinal, Archbishop Wickland is not Suspensio, then Suspensio just loses its meaning, you know, completely.
Well, you see, when you talk about bills that you're known as a rebel priest,
Yeah.
there are things against which one has to rebel.
Oh,
and you see, take someone like Wickland now. He's an archbishop in good standing with the Vatican. He's pro-choice. They polled the priests in his diocese, and they found 51% of them are pro-choice.
In abortion, on abortion.
Yeah, on abortion, yeah. And there's one other thing. I owe you an apology, actually, because I thought either you were misrepresenting Wickland or you'd been a dupe and been informed, because in one of your New Jersey Catholic newsletters, you gave extracts from a sex education program in Wickland's diocese, and I thought anyone who could even consider the possibility of this being taught to children must be pathological.
Yeah.
And I actually got in touch. You probably know Father Schneider.
Yeah.
I said, could you get hold of this for me?
Yeah.
I would like to, before I quote this, I would like to see the original. Yeah. And actually, you had left out all the worst bits. They couldn't be printed, could they?
I know. I was afraid, really. Because I don't know what hands they're going to fall into. You know, I mean, it's like
I would not go to the British Customs carrying that issue of the New Jersey Catholic newsletter in case I was arrested.
Yeah.
But I mean, this man, we're in a ridiculous situation. This man isn't a rebel. He is literally not tolerating. He's leading the corruption of the Catholics in his diocese.
Yeah.
99% of the priests in his diocese are cooperating in this, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
So
well,
one should rebel against that.
They use terms like rebel and things. I don't know. I don't hear those terms. Of course, people who come to our chapel, you know, I don't even hear that term anymore because pretty much, let's say, the hand-to-hand combat with the bishop is over with. Bishop Garrity is out of office. The other bishop kind of just keeps quiet, you know. I understand that he's been called down by Rome himself because his seminary is really liberal and the programs he has. But, you know, terminology, there's a new term that's been invented recently called homophobia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, afraid of those guys.
Yeah.
And the word is homophone. You know, like you're a homophone. Guilty, I am afraid. I am a homophone. I'm afraid of what they do. I mean, the influence they have. I'm afraid of the children. I'm afraid of them.
We're afraid for the children.
Yeah.
Have any of them been suspended nationally? I don't think any of them been. They send them to hospitals or something, but they're never suspended.
Yeah,
or switch their parishes.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, what's your position with respect to Archbishop Lefebvre?
Oh, boy, I'm glad you asked me that. No, I just think he's a saint. I think the Society of Pius X is great. And I know many of you have concluded that the reason why we have had certain concessions from Rome is because of the strength of Archbishop Lefebvre's organization. You know, he has seminaries, I think 6 seminaries. The one in the United States is thriving, I know that. I know 3 boys from our chapel who are there, and I know there's, and the Archbishop Lefebvre, I think, is the Saint Athanasius of our age, and the fact that he has grown has put a lot of pressure on. I do think that the way it works with Rome, it's similar to our constitutional government. I think the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I think if you complain, if you send petitions, not out of disrespect or anything like that, but if you put pressure some way or another, that Rome tends to respond. Generally speaking, people in high positions will not move unless there's pressure put on them. I think that's true generally.
That's how the American bishops got communion in the hand authorized, communion into both kinds authorized, and how they plan to get altar girls authorized.
Well, that's how they do it, right.
And really, traditional Catholics, they're just adopting the tactics which Rome seems to
Yeah, but answer this, Father Wickens. This notion that the squeaking wheel gets the grease, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But I've heard some really pious Catholics, so-called conservative Catholics, who say it's unbecoming for us loyal Catholics to squeak.
Yeah, I know.
What do you say to that?
Well, but when children are being corrupted?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing we have to realize. We're at war. I mean, I've heard Michael say this. This is a crisis. You know, I mean, we're invaded. I mean, we live in France, and we've been taken over by the enemy. I mean, almost every college, every chancery. I mean, tout le monde. Is that how to say it in French?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, practically every. You know, there's a few little isolated things around, and you know, we talk about the gains that have been made since. I'll get back to this. We'll get back to that point in a minute. But so the society grew. It produced priests. I think there's been something like 250 priests ordained by Archbishop Lefebvre, and there's many more on the way up. And they give retreats. I mean, who else gives diocesan Ignatian retreats to the extent of the society? Out in St. Mary's and in Connecticut.
Well, who else upholds the moral and doctrinal teaching of the Pope, besides, in this area, besides you in the society? If a person came, say to you, Bill Maher, and said, I would like to go and live in a parish where I'm sure the priest from the pulpit and in his school will fully concur with all the doctrinal and moral teaching of Pope John Paul II, which is absolutely orthodox, of course, where they can have a dignified liturgy, where there's going to be no unwholesome sex education. Would it not be, would not be obliged to say, well, you could go to St. Anthony of Padua, or you could go to St. Pius X parish? Can you think of another parish?
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But now, Father, you are a priest. You make no pretense that you have been consecrated a bishop. Eventually, you're going to die. All men are mortal.
Yeah.
Doesn't that place you in a strange position? Are you going to be sterilized, as it were, spiritually speaking? You see the need, therefore, somehow to link up with a bishop.
Well, yeah, we're kind of linked up with Archbishop Lefebvre's, the Society of Pius X. Our children were bussed out to Long Island, and Bishop Williamson confirmed them. 20 of them last time he was around, something like that. So we are connected with that, and I hope to, I get around to it, is turning over any assets from our society, from our parish, you know, upon my demise, to the society, so there would be a continuity. So,
by which time one would hope they would be reconciled with the Holy See, in any case.
You know, that's what kind of held me back, too, because in my negotiations, when I first, Bishop Garrity, you know, they leaned on me, I thought that Rome would intervene, and I thought maybe it was around the corner, you know, some kind of a turnaround.
But Father Greaser thought that as well, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right, the priest in Ohio, correct?
His appeal's been turned down.
Yeah, I know, you think it's, and so Father O'Connor, too. I don't think anything's happened before Father O'Connor.
And Father Carney from Kansas City.
Someday Michael's going to write a book on all these casualties.
Yeah. They're all wonderful priests. And that's one of the great advantages is, since I've started saying the traditional Mass and sort of gotten on the circuit, I've really met some wonderful priests and lay people like yourselves, like you three men have been indefatigable, travel. Michael Davies is in Canada, Dr. Maher is in Buffalo, you know. So, and as a priest, and you've been writing for The Wanderer for years, right? And as a priest, our role is a bit different. I mean, we confect sacraments. You know, we give absolution. So,
and you're also supposed to save souls. And that's,
right.
I'm trying. You're being too charitable. I'm trying to make you be judgmental. You see, I would like to. I hope a lot of priests are going to watch this transmission in their parishes. And I'd like anybody.
Well, you know why a lot of priests don't join us. We'll say, I'll use that term, us. They have one line. It's like Henny Youngman philosophy, one-liners. You know, well, I'm loyal to the Pope, or something like that. I mean, a cliche. You might say cliche answers, and
but that is insulting to the Pope. That presumes then the Pope wants people to be indoctrinated with renew. He wants them to be corrupted with sex education. He wants them to be taught false doctrine.
Well, see, if you could get beyond the cliche and sit down and talk about it and explain it, but you usually cannot get beyond that.
Would this be a false scenario? It's hard to imagine. Imagine I was our Lord of the Last Judgment. You tell me if I'm going wrong anywhere here, right? We'll say someone like Monsignor Murphy, shall we say, from New York diocese comes up, and our Lord says to him, you tell me if I'm wrong here. You were responsible for the souls of the people in your parish. For 25 years in your schools, the children were taught no sound Catholic doctrine at all, and 80–90% of them lapsed and left the faith, joined Protestant sects. For 20 to 25 years in the school for which you were in charge, they were taught sex education, which corrupted a lot of them. For 20 to 25 years, they were supposed, in the liturgy, they saw irregularities like altar girls, which was a defiance of the Pope. You didn't approve of them, but you let it go on. You didn't approve of the CCD schemes, but you let them go on. You let the sex education go on. But do you think that priest is just going to get away with it? And this is so we say 90% of the priests in this country. Is that fair that that's the situation they're in? They know what's going on, and they're doing nothing about it.
Yeah.
So shouldn't they be thinking about their immortal souls?
Well, they fall back on that cliche. I have to obey my bishop. I'm not approving it because
it's not the Pope's duty in a particular parish to go in and see that the children in the schools aren't being corrupted. It's the parish priest's duty, and they must know that, mustn't they?
Right.
Well, their defense will be, but Lord Jesus, I did have a commission, and I did have renew in my parish, so therefore I'm clean.
Well, you can isolate.
I'm talking about the conservatives, though. If someone believes in renew, that's the strange thing. If a priest really believes in renew and believes in modernism, strangely enough, he won't be condemned for it in a way, as long as he really made an effort to learn the truth.
He can plead insanity.
No, it's all these conservative. It's all these conservative priests who know what's right and know what's wrong, and do you think chicken out of it over here? Yeah, they just chicken out of their responsibilities.
But you know, Michael and Bill, more and more of those priests, good priests too, more and more of them have been influenced by 20 years of relentless study days and living in the zeitgeist of the diocese. To give you a good example, I know a priest who's, quote, Orthodox. He would never preach, but he's in favor of general absolution. You know, he's weakened by that. And I know another priest who's considered conservative, and when he sees all these scandals in the clergy, he thinks one of the reasons why there's all these scandals is because of mandatory celibacy. See, so, and he would never have said that 10 years ago. But if you continually live and work in that climate, and everybody you know, and all the retreats and the convocations, they don't even have retreats anymore. They call them convocations.
And they're workshops.
It just wears you down and weakens you. Maybe not destroys your faith entirely, but there's degrees. If you might, on a scale of 1 to 10, you might say 10 is Orthodox and 1 is liberal. Well, there's a lot of priests in between. They're not all on 10 and 1, you know. But I know we're running out of time, but I would say my feeling as far as the best way to restore the faith, everybody has, you know, all these other petitions and lectures, all those things are good. But my idea is to build up the chapels. Build them up. There's 5 or 6 around New Jersey. Archbishop Lefebvre has many. And the more numbers you have, instead of 300 at our chapel, 3,000.
You have 300 at your chapel?
Yeah.
What's been the growth of that? How did that progress?
It's been steady by inches, not by yards or miles, but by inches. But that is, I think, the greatest proclamation, the numbers, you know, myself.
I remember Hamish Fraser always used to quote Edmund Burke, "For the triumph of evil, it's sufficient for good men to do nothing."
Yeah.
And you're doing something.
Well, thank you.
And it's a pity 99% of the priests aren't following your example.
Thank you.
Being very anti-clerical today.
We're running out of time. My last comment is Father Wickens has the foresight and the charity to have an excellent youth group, because the good Catholic young boys and girls, all they can meet usually is creeps. And Father Wickens allows them to meet in an honorable situation where there's some sort of faith and enthusiasm. So God bless you and your work, and let's hope somehow we can clone you.
Okay. Thank you.